Hey guys and girls out there in MIDI Guitar land, it's Doily coming at you from Seoul, South Korea. Haven't had much time lately to be making videos, but something happened recently that is worth talking about. So MIDI Guitar 3, I'm in the pre-release beta program. So currently, if you're downloading the regular version via the Jam Origin forum, you'll be on 3.0.62. But there's a handful of us who are working on helping the developer with the, all the fine tuning of the application to get as much as possible out of it. And there've been a few really great additions. One of the great additions is this ability to choose the MIDI output. The thing that I'm really excited about is that the overhaul of the MIDI output system means that we can now use native MP instruments and third-party MP instruments inside Bitwig 5 without having to use the standalone version of the application. If you've seen my previous video on using MIDI Guitar 3 with Bitwig, you'll recall that you had to go over here, you had to open the standalone application, you had to set the MIDI guitar out. Well, you had to choose whichever preset you're using. So we'll say MIDI Guitar Mini. Right, you open that, that would create a virtual MIDI output. Then you would have to go over to the site of Jurgen Mossgraber and grab his Bitwig Studio extension. It's currently at 24.71. And you would then have to go back into Bitwig and you would have to go into the controllers and you would have to set up this device by adding a controller, Generic Flexi, add, and then you'd have to go through and set this up. Now I've already set it up here, so I'll use this as the item. You can change the name of the item here. I've called it MG3 just for simplicity's sake. At the input, you have to select the virtual output from MIDI Guitar 3. So I've got that here, MIDI Guitar out. Just be aware that if this has no MIDI output, the port disappears. Okay, so that's not a deal breaker because Bitwig will detect the port as soon as it's reactivated, but it's good to know. The other thing with the Generic Flexi is that you must have an output port. Now, technically speaking, MIDI Guitar 3 doesn't have an input port. I mean, it has an input port here for controllers and for program changes that it will receive. But anyway, the point is that I had to create a virtual port here with the IAC driver in the audio MIDI settings in macOS. Not a huge deal, easy enough to do. So you have to have an input port and you have to have an output port. Then you have to go through and basically you'll see now that any notes that I'm playing here are being visualized up here. Go through, you can set your custom input name. Mine's called MG3 MPE. Set the MPE pitch bend sensitivity to match the output here. Now by default it's bend range 48 with MIDI MPE output, so I've left that at 48 here. MIDI polyphonic expression must be on. I've set all these to on, and that's that. You should save the item. And then you'll get this notice here. And then according to Mr. Mossgraber, I believe you have to reload it to ensure that it loads properly. But I haven't had any issues with that. It's just, but I saw it mentioned in one of his videos. If you've set everything up like this, now using MIDI Guitar 3 Hex externally, we'll get the MIDI into here and you'll get your pitch bend data. The problem was that if you opened up an instrument here, say we open Polymer, if you use the plugin version, the MIDI data would pass through, but the pitch bend data would not pass through. So you couldn't bend strings basically, or use a whammy bar or anything. So that kind of sucked. And obviously the way around that was to use the external version. Now, the good news is, now that the plugin has had the MIDI output overhaul, you can rather simply instantiate MIDI Guitar 3. And if I use the MIDI Guitar Mini preset, by default, because Bitwig uses VST3 or VST2, the way I've set up Bitwig 5 is to use preferred formats. And that's sort of for simplicity's sake. So it basically has a hierarchy where, you know, if there's a native version of a plugin rather than a version which requires the Rosetta translation layer to operate, it will choose that. Then if there's a VST3 version and a VST2 version, it will choose the VST3 version. And then above that, also, if there's a clap version, it will choose clap over VST3. So there's no clap version of MIDI Guitar 3. So the way it works is that it's going to choose the VST3 by default. When you choose the VST3 version of MIDI Guitar 3 and you choose the MIDI Guitar Mini preset, the MIDI output defaults to sending MIDI out to the track. Okay, so this is interesting, and this is something that I want to work with more, but I'm waiting for the next version of MIDI Guitar 3 0.63 version W, which is going to have a full-time, constantly active MIDI output. And when that happens, I think that it will probably be a little bit easier to work with. But for now, I'm simply going to choose the virtual MIDI output. It says Logic GarageBand, but it works for anything. The reason is because this creates its own MIDI port. As I was saying before, if you look back in the controller settings now, where's it gone? Oh, that's interesting. There it is. So if I go back into the controller settings, you can see that this is now active. And by the same token, if I say no MIDI output and open again, it's gone. Okay. The good news is that in the current version, you can save the output into your presets. So when I open this preset here, it automatically opens MIDI Guitar out. There you can see it opens that. And actually you can save any output and the plugin will keep that in the preset settings. But anyway, this basically just means that you don't need to open the standalone version anymore. They can stay closed and you can just run it in your project. Okay, so the only caveat is that we still need to have, I don't know why that's happening. So the only caveat is that we still need to have this Generic Flexi device set up here, because we need this to basically carry and transform the MIDI inside Bitwig, which has its own proprietary system for MPE, which is great for some cases, but it doesn't really work when you're using MPE generating plugins. So now with the MIDI Guitar 3 plugin instantiated on this track here, I've just renamed it. The hex tracker in the plugin has the ability to detect a hex device. So in this case, I'm using an SY1000. When I click on the audio device here, you can see it opens up straight into the audio settings, and the input device here is the SY1000, and I'm selecting the channel 1 through 8 hex pickup as the input. Okay, so that's going to reset the application whenever you change the audio there. So you'll just want to change that to the virtual MIDI output again. So this is an audio track, but it requires no input or output because the plugin itself is handling the... At this point, if we've got a synthesizer instrument here, like I've put in the Polymer synth, it's as simple as now selecting the MIDI Guitar 3 MPE input, which was the Generic Flexi controller that I created in the Bitwig settings. You just want to make sure that your MIDI is activated here. Turn that on. And now MIDI is passing through with bends. It's all there. Okay, so, but the other good news is that this will also work for third-party MPE instruments. So let's take, for example, Equator. So you just need to tell the instrument to use MPE. Okay, so we've got the proprietary instruments, we've got third-party instruments. Now, there's one more really great thing that we can do here, and this may have been possible with previous versions, but I hadn't quite picked up on it. You can use multiple MIDI output devices in a single preset. You could use it on multiple chains if you're using a full 3-chained patch. And in the second instrument here, I'm just going to send MIDI out to door to door. This is a virtual MIDI port that I created again with the ISE driver that I use sometimes to transmit MIDI between different doors, like say between Logic and Ableton Live or Bitwig and third-party standalone synthesizers or something like that. This essentially bypasses the door altogether and sends the MIDI out directly from the plugin. So this means that, for example, I could open Equator here. Okay, and just in the audio MIDI settings, I'm going to ensure that the port is active. So ISE driver door to door. Okay, and this should now work perfectly with pitch bend data, and it's not even touching Bitwig really. This just means that Bitwig can become a slightly more tightly integrated control center for your MIDI guitar needs. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to outline those things, and as I was saying, there's a new version coming that's going to have a full-time MIDI output at like the top level of the plugin, which I think is going to slightly change how we have to do this. I'm sort of predicting that what will probably happen is that the port will maybe remain the same, but it will just be permanently active here. So this will never disappear. If you save, so I've got this preset here, MIDI Guitar Hex Mini. I'm going to save this. I'm just going to go into the beta test section that I've created here, and I'm going to call this double MIDI output. Try and spell that correctly. Okay, and so that's now all set here, and I'm just going to save this set, right? So I previously called it MIDI Guitar 3 hosted test, but I'm just going to call this 2 because there's a slight difference with the previous version. Okay, so I'm going to save that. If I relaunch Bitwig, and if I open that project, I'm just going to mute that. But if we look at the MIDI Guitar 3 plugin, it's recalled the preset that I saved, so we can hear the MIDIs going directly. Right, so it's going straight through. It's interesting the way it's positioned them there. I thought they were elsewhere before, but anyway, it doesn't. That might be something to have a look at. Bitwig's going to recall your settings in MIDI Guitar 3 anyway. So it's a really, really happening thing now, and it's only going to get better, I'm sure. You'll notice here that it did recall the door-to-door output and the MIDI Guitar 3 virtual output also. So until the next version drops, I hope you guys are having fun with MIDI Guitar 3 and making lots of great music. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.